All right, everybody. I think it's time that we get started. I'm sure we'll have other people joining us, but we have an amazing turnout for this event, so a lot of interest, which is really exciting. So I welcome everybody to Artwork, How to Paint Mural Art in the Public Sphere with Jill Stanton and Andrea Bowes, presented in partnership with the Allied Arts Council of Lethbridge and the Edmonton Arts Council. My name is Tara Galanders, and I am the Program and Membership Manager for the Allied Arts Council. I would also like to introduce my partner in crime, Angeline Simon, who is a manager at CASA. Angeline will be handling the Q&A at the end of the presentations this evening. So please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, tell us where you're from, tell us a bit about yourself, and also type your questions into the chat as well. The Allied Arts Council of Lethbridge acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains and pays respect to the Blackfoot people past, present, and future, while recognizing and respecting their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship to the land. Lethbridge is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. So a little bit about us. The Allied Arts Council is a 63-year-old multidisciplinary member-based art service organization. We manage CASA, a large art center, which has a robust education and gallery program. We run a fine arts and crafts store. We provide ongoing professional development programming, residency opportunities. We sit on the Public Art Committee. We organize art days, Christmas at CASA, and a lot more. But primarily, we promote opportunities for performing and visual artists and to connect and to build a vibrant arts community in Lethbridge and in Southern Alberta. Tonight is being recorded and will be shown on the AAC Lethbridge YouTube channel, where you can also catch some of our previous sessions and some of the virtual projects we have been working on during COVID. On a personal note, I would like to thank Kasia Sosnowski for making the connections necessary for this PD session to occur. Kasia sat on the Lethbridge Public Art Committee and worked for the AAC as the AAC Works Manager. And she was integral in helping organize the City of Lethbridge pilot project around murals. Kasia's last day at the AAC was last week as she is going off to complete an MFA. We will miss her and we wish her the best of luck. The City of Lethbridge and the Public Art Committee have, as I mentioned, initiated a pilot project for mural painting, and it hopes to build and support capacity as we anticipate there will be ongoing opportunities in the future. And while there has been outstanding interest, there has also been a lot of questions about how do you create a large-scale mural? What paints to use? What equipment is required? And on it goes. So to answer some of these questions tonight and soak up all their extensive knowledge, I am very happy to introduce Jill Stanton and Andrea Bowes. Jill is an artist and muralist living in Edmonton, Alberta. She has extensive experience painting large-scale murals for both private and public municipal clients, interior and exterior across North America. Over the past 8 years, Jill has produced over 70 murals of varying complexity and size. She has painted walls for several mural festivals, including the Vancouver Mural Festival, Winnipeg's Wall to Wall, Tulsa's Habit Fest, Dallas's Wild West Mural Fest, and the Beltline Urban Mural Project in Calgary. Jill's murals combine graphic elements using still life objects to act as symbols in order to weave open-ended narratives. And Andrea works as the conservator with the Edmonton Arts Council. She came to the EAC in 2012, working initially with artists commissioned under the City of Lethbridge Percent for Art policy as the public art officer. She later moved into conservation, where her training and experience as an objects conservator has been put to use maintaining and conserving Edmonton's public art collection. In her role, she advises on material selection and construction of new works being commissioned, and she prepares plans for their ongoing maintenance and conservation needs. So Andrea, please take it away.
Okay. Let me share my screen. Hang on a minute. Oh, I'm not on, that's good. There we go. Can you guys see that? Perfect. So as Tara has introduced me already, I'm Andrea Bowes. I am the Public Art Conservator with the Edmonton Arts Council. I contribute to artworks being commissioned in a review capacity, looking at proposed artworks, materials, and designs through the lens of the person who in the end will look after their ongoing maintenance and conservation needs. I have a background in conservation, as Tara has mentioned, but I also have training as an architectural technologist, and this gives me some deeper insight into construction means and methods and how they apply to public art in the built environment. I have been asked to present information about murals, and I have approached the subject from the practical position of that person who looks after the ongoing preservation of the artwork. So I'm going to start at my start, which is location and substrate. My slides, if they put you to sleep, don't worry. I've seen Jill's PowerPoint, and it'll wake you up right away. So bear with us, and we'll start with a practical starting place, location and substrate. I would expect that as the muralist, the site has already been pre-selected by your client. However, the following is useful for you so that in any discussion with the client, you can knowledgeably ask questions about the site as it affects the work you're going to be taking on. So, where is the mural site? Let's consider some common conditions. What direction does it face? North, east, south, west? Is it reachable, like by a person of regular height or shorter? A south exposure will be have significant impact on the longevity of your work. Heat and light levels will promote fading. Exposure is something you need to consider when selecting your paint. You may want to consider paints that have built-in UV inhibitors or good light fastness ratings. So what is the substrate? Is it concrete, brick, metal? All of these materials require different preparation methods and have different inherent risks in their construction. Concrete, brick, and CMUs. So what are CMUs? Those are those rectangular concrete bricks that many warehouse buildings and commercial buildings are constructed of. They're porous and moisture is absorbed into them. And with the freeze thaw cycle we have in Alberta, this can cause blistering and flaking of your paint layer. Metal, though not porous, has other considerations. Heat can cause expansion and contraction, which may have an effect on your paint, and corrosion at attachment points could be a problem as well. So what is the condition of the substrate? Is it a new wall? Is it older? Has it already been painted? Is there evidence of damage or ongoing drainage problems? Do you have mold and mildew on the wall in some areas? Is the artwork within reach? So I've mentioned that already. If it is, you may want to consider a varnish or an anti-graffiti coating. Now, how far up the wall does your client want you to be painting? If you're at ground level, there's higher risk that debris buildup and rising damp, snow and salt buildup will have an effect on your mural over time. So surface preparation. This is the most important part in any mural creation. The surface must be clean and dry before any primer or paint is applied. The condition, type, and location of substrate will determine what procedure to be used. You may have to consult industry specialists for recommendations on how to clean the wall and what primers to use for your project. In the case of a concrete or brick wall, are there any cracks in the wall? These are locations where water will collect and be absorbed into that porous surface and cause problems. And over time, your paint will blister and bubble in those areas. So it's best that those cracks be filled before you start painting. It can also be an indicator of a structural problem in the wall. So that's something you want to be sure that your client is aware of, and that you proceed with full understanding of how to take care of that condition. Generally, it is always good to take the surface down to its original condition. The integrity of a previously coated wall is unknown. You don't know how well that's going to stand up, how long it's been there. It's difficult to know if your coating will be compatible with what is already there. If you can't determine what that paint is, you don't know if your paint is going to adhere to it sufficiently. If you do paint on an existing paint layer and it's acrylic, you know, and you're using acrylics, there is a good chance it will adhere. But if it's oil or if it's unknown, it's best to abrade or remove that paint layer, as well as any deteriorating paint. So typically walls are prepared, concrete and brick, with pressure washing, some sanding and crack filling. So here's a super, one of my super boring slides. And this takes me back to my architecture days. So there you have those CMU walls. And that just soaks up all kinds of moisture during the construction phase. And then you have a brick facade wall on the right of the slide. So brick walls are constructed where the brick facade is tied back to the structural wall regularly. And there's mortar, of course, in between the bricks. There's weep holes to allow for that moisture that collects inside that airspace to escape the wall. Now, all of this is to say that these walls are porous. They absorb and release moisture as ambient conditions dictate. So brick walls might be something that you want to consider a secondary support for your mural. So we will just move on to metal. What kind of siding are you looking at? Is it galvanized? Is it painted? Is it bare? This type of substrate is one where you would want to consult industry coating specialists and building owners to get as much information as you can about what that wall is constructed of. What is the condition of the paint layer? What is the paint? Will it need some scuffing and then cleaning and then a proper primer? All of these things can be arduous and costly, and need to be considered well in advance of a mural going onto that wall. What else about that? So who do you consult? The building owner, commercial paint companies, industry specialists, siding companies, the American Galvanizers Association can all provide you information. So it's about looking into how to best deal with that wall. So I've mentioned secondary substrates. So dye bond. Everybody, I'm sure many people have heard the word dye bond. And dye bond is an aluminum composite panel. So it is a trade name and has become synonymous with aluminum composite panels. But in Canada, your chances of finding dye bond panels is actually pretty slim. In Canada, most of our supply of composite panels are offshore. And so when you are ordering dye bond and you order from a supplier and say, I want dye bond, that supplier should be telling you that, no, we don't have dye bond, we have X, Y, or Z. And you can proceed that way. Creosote or medium density overlay plywood or other substrates that have are commonly used in sign industry and therefore really super nice for murals. They have a a clear, smooth surface on one side or both. You can get two good sides. And again, with composite panels and with MDO, your surface preparation is really important to look into. And you need to test the adhesion of your primer to those surfaces. So also cost is a big consideration with these materials. Aluminum composite panels, I purchased one just recently. I'm going to talk about it in a minute, for around $50, but MDO can be up $100 to $200 a panel. Adhesion testing. Here's another really boring slide, but this was super fun. I thought, okay, I'm going to go through this exercise. I haven't done it in a while. So I purchased an aluminum composite panel, an iBond product. I contacted 3A Composites. 3A Composites are the company in the States that produce dye bond. And I also spoke with the people that I purchased the panel from, and I asked them, how would you prep your panels for painting a mural on them? And both of them said, oh, our panels are prepared for that. All you have to do is wipe them with alcohol and you are good to go. So I thought, I don't know, I'm going to try that out. So I divided my panel. I wiped half of it in alcohol and half of it I sanded down, and I primed it with direct to metal primer, and I waited 3 days. And then I performed what is called a crosshatch adhesion test, where I cut these little lines through my primer. I burnished down a piece of duct tape and I ripped it off. And my sanded panel, you can see the tape there, no paint came off. But with the alcohol wipes, all of my primer came off. So it's a really good idea to check your materials out. And a good technical resource for this kind of test and other topics to do with murals is the Just Paint publications from Golden Paints. They talk about this crosshatch test quite extensively. And you know, the internet is a great source for information about murals and looking at sites and prepping your surfaces. So material selection. Any paint materials that you're going to use have to be compatible with the substrate and the paints you're using and any final protective coatings that you're applying. And ideally, the paints you select would be the best quality that your budget will support. You want to use, of course, exterior paints that are formulated for outdoors. And you will want to observe and research any health and safety regulations around those coatings. The paint supplier will have that. Material data sheets will supply that kind of information for you. And here's an example. MSA varnish by Golden is not VOC compliant for use with directly on architectural surfaces. So what does that mean? What it means is that if you're painting directly on a wall, interior or exterior, on a mural that is larger than 150 square feet, which is the coverage rate for a quart size of the MSA varnish, it is not compliant. You cannot use that varnish in that situation. Golden really does cater to the artists and particularly muralists, and they have a MSA varnish that is VOC compliant. You just have to order it from them. What else can I tell you? The MSA varnish does have a UV component in it, so it's a good product, fairly robust as well. Just a note about concrete masonry walls. If you're painting on a new one, you'll want to check with your paint rep to know how long that wall has to kind of be in the environment in a finished condition before you paint on it. Because new brick walls and CMU walls during construction absorb a lot of moisture, and they have to kind of equalize. They have to settle into their landscape before you can apply paint to them. So paint, let's talk about house paint. Commercial paints are not formulated for extended years of life. They're going to be repainted. If you're considering using a house paint, quiz your paint rep and look seriously at the data sheets and for things, products that are specific for outdoor use, as I've mentioned. You might want to look for other qualities like UV protection. So a lot of industrial paint or commercial paints, Sherwin-Williams, for example, their literature will say that the paint is resistant to fading. So it's resistant to fading, but it's not really, they have there's no regulations about light fastness with commercial paints. Dulux, they have in their product literature that they have advanced UV protection in their product. So these are the kinds of things that you're going to want to consider when you're thinking about using a house paint. I do want to highlight here that UV is only one component of light. Light intensity will cause fading regardless of UV protection. Therefore, I would encourage artists where possible and the budget allows that you use artist paints. You will not find commercial paints that have a light fastness rating, whereas artist paints do. And I'll talk more about light fastness in a little bit. Artist paints. Artist paints have a higher pigment load. They have a higher quality and amount of resin and binders, which means they're going to stick on that wall and hold the pigment in a better bond over time. And they do have light fastness ratings. Golden does actively test their own materials, specifically following the ASTM procedures. They also provide a list of 39 paints that are best suited for outdoor murals. And they produce a line of paint specifically for mural painting. Nova is another company that works specifically to address muralists' needs. There's another little thing plug that I'm going to make as a conservator. We often, we ask artists to provide an index card, if you will, of the colors that they've used in their mural or on their artwork. Specifically, what type of paint, what was the paint recipe if they're using an industrial paint, say something for a metal sculpture. But in muralist's situation, it would be like a color card. So you've got drawdowns of all the paints that you've used in your mural. And over time, you can go back and check that mural and see how well those paints have lived up over time. So here's that lovely little word that I mentioned earlier, light fastness. UV, it seems to be a buzzword in the industry. But I'm going to draw your attention to the fact that UV is only one wavelength in a full spectrum of visible and non-visible light. Outdoor murals are exposed to every kind of harsh environmental condition imaginable, sunlight being one of the biggies. It blasts your mural 365 days a year. And light intensity is energy. And we all experience it in the spring. When the light comes out, we're energized, right? And what that energy does when the light is absorbed or reflected by the paint surface, it activates bonds and causes fading. So light fastness ratings are applied to artist materials. Ratings determined through testing methods, as I've mentioned, set out by ASTM, whereby measurable degrees of observable change in a color, we'll put that color into one of the three light fastness ratings, 1, 2, or 3. Light fastness rating of 1, however, doesn't mean that that color isn't going to fade. It just means that it is more resistant to damage from light exposure, and it will take a little bit longer to see significant color change. These rates give artists the tools to make informed choices about the paints used in a mural application. Your work cannot be repainted like a house. And so if the budget can support it, artist paints are a good measure to ensure that mural stands up over time. I did a little check on volume comparisons between artist paints and commercial paints. And I found here that they're similar. So cost is different, but quantity is similar. So how are we going to attach these secondary supports to walls? Panels can be mounted to frames that are pre-installed on a wall with a regular grid pattern to allow the work to be attached. This is a lovely mural we have in Edmonton on the north side of the city at the North Gate Transit Center, done by Mark Fedes and Chelsea Boyda, done on aluminum composite panels that were attached to this frame that the construction project put in place for them. Frames can also be put on walls after construction on an old, like on an existing building as well. So I've seen that kind of installation in St. Albert and other places as well. So maybe you have to attach that mural directly to the wall. What type of wall is it? Is it concrete? Is it brick? Is it metal? Does your client want the panels to be removable? What is the construction of that wall? Jill has recently gone through the exercise of having to figure out how to install a panel over an expansion joint. So an expansion joint in a brick wall is a regularly spaced location where the wall, there's a space, and the wall is expected to move over time with those humidity and heat changes. And if you fix a panel over that expansion joint and you don't allow for movement, something's going to give, either the wall or your panel. So those kinds of things need to be considered when you're looking at ways of attaching that panel to the wall. Please build a space between the mural and the wall with washers, nylon washers, that kind of thing. It allows moisture and breathing to happen between that mural and the wall face. So here's an example in Edmonton of a composite panel that's attached directly to the wall with this really slick little system of aluminum tubing that was cut probably about a ½ inch deep, and the panel was screwed directly into that CMU wall. And then here's an example of a mural that was attached also directly to the wall, but it didn't have a space between itself and that CMU wall. So a flashing was attached to the top of it. So this was a great solution to allow rainwater and moisture to flow over top of the mural and down the wall instead of being collecting at the top and along the edges, where the wood would absorb that moisture, expand, and pop the bolts off the wall. So screws. This is the second to last slide of mine, and it's the second to last most boring slide. So, but these are really slick. This is a tamper-proof screw. It's stainless steel. So if you're going to have to remove that panel, if your client wants you to remove it, this is the kind of thing that you're going to want to find is a tamper-proof screw, stainless steel. Use some anti-seize compound when you're attaching that panel to the wall. And you have gone a long way to making that panel, well, making it so it's not going to be damaged having to take it off the wall. You don't just need this screw, you need this screw to go with the last boring slide, which is about anchors. Granger, other industrial specialists, you can find a concrete anchor. These are concrete anchors for those concrete walls where you drill into the wall, you tap the anchor into the wall, and then you can screw directly into that. So that's it. That's the last boring slide. I'm going to pass it on to Jill, I think, at this point. And I have to stop sharing my screen. Give me a minute.
Hey, thanks, Andrea. I never am bored listening to all of that stuff, to be quite honest with you, because I don't really go about it in the same way, and I always seem to learn lots. So yeah, I learned lots. I took many notes. Thank you. And I am about to probably make you cry a bunch with what I'm about to.
Oh no. No.
Yeah. I'm very glad that Andrea talked a lot about like specifics around materials and fading and kind of duration and wall prep and stuff like that. I touch on it a little bit, but not a ton. So yeah, it's always good. I'll get into a little bit with like client relations and stuff like that, but it's always good to know, like just to make your client aware of the trade-offs between cost and longevity of your mural. Most clients are not going to want, they're going to balk at like several thousands of dollars worth of like golden paint or like artist grade paint for a really huge wall. So that's something to keep in mind. Yeah, so Andrea, thank you. That's all very good information. And I'm very sorry that I'm going to do this terrible mean thing. Oops, sorry, let me just figure out how to share my screen again. Was working. Okay. Perfect. Is it working? Great. Okay, can anybody, you guys can all see this? I wish, oops, oh my goodness.
Yep, this is good.
Okay, I can't see the control thing anymore. Okay, great. So yeah, I guess you guys heard a little bit about me. I have like a very like huge mural painting background. Most of what I do is kind of like painting directly on surfaces, for better or for worse. Definitely the murals that I paint are not gonna have, you know, like a 25-year lifespan. I try and make my clients aware of that. A lot of times, especially right now, murals are kind of like very popular. People just kind of want a mural for like not a huge amount of money. And so that's kind of where I specialize in, is getting a mural up on the wall for like, you know, like a lower to mid-range budget and like a big bang for your buck, sort of, to say, I guess. So this is hopefully a bit of information, like helpful information for you about how to paint a mural. And again, it's just me. There are 1,000 different ways to paint a mural. So I guess the first thing to think about is how do you work? So every painter is going to have a different approach, obviously, to painting. Do you work more graphically? Do you work more abstract, or like loose brush strokes, tight lines, like shapes, portraits? That's something to really think about when you start to scale up. yeah, house paint, if you do go that route, is a lot different to use than your typical artist acrylic paint. Artist acrylic paint, you can get a few different variations, like the fluid kind or the heavy body. All of it is handles totally different than house paint. You've probably used house paint at some point in your life to paint a wall in your house or whatever. So I would say the first step, if you want to start painting murals, is just to kind of get a feel for those materials. Typically, most people have experience with like white house paint and stuff like that, but different pigments and different brands will all play differently with each other, and they'll cover differently, and your brushstrokes will look different. It's all kind of a bit of an experiment at first. So yeah, keep that in mind. Oh, my PowerPoint, great. So starting to think big about your work. By the way, there's so much to talk about that I'm just gonna kind of fly through here. I have a bunch of slides. If we don't get through them, sorry, but we can take a bunch of questions. Hopefully I cover some stuff that you guys are thinking about. So this is the hardest thing, I think, for most artists to kind of wrap their heads around, especially after working like really small or just never really kind of working at that larger scale. So I come from a printmaking background, actually. So lots of like copper etching and very small ticky work. So I get it. Like, it's a huge adjustment to start thinking about building giant environments as opposed to these kind of intimate pieces. One thing to keep in mind when you're doing your drawing or thinking about mural planning is to build your drawing thinking about different vantage points and seeing your mural from like close up or far away, and making sure that there are a variety of shapes that kind of complement those viewing distances. So this is like a nice thing for people to, it's just like a nice thing in a mural to give some interest at different places where people might see it. Also keep in mind that if your drawing is, you know, this big and you're using a pencil to make some outlines, when you translate that into a wall, those pencil lines might be, you know, depending on how big your wall is, it might be that you're using a 12-inch roller to make those pencil lines to really kind of like translate that exact shape to the wall so it has that same feel and that same line weight in the scale. So yeah, so keep that in mind as well. One thing that I really like to do is, as far as detail goes, I used to do murals with like basically 100% detail. It was just detail chaos. And they were interesting, like they were cool because it was just kind of like this all over crazy pattern. But they weren't as interesting from far away. They were more kind of suited to interior murals and murals that you would only really be kind of like in an intimate viewing distance with. So what I like to do is use detail kind of sparingly and kind of keep it to these like little nice pockets where you can really kind of make those flourishes as a reward for people to come closer to look at your mural or to look at your piece. But maybe they wouldn't be so visible from far away. And so that way there is that kind of like, if you're a real detail crazy person like I am, and you really get kind of excited about like small little intimate pockets, like you can still do that, but just think kind of strategically about where like when you're going to place those, because often murals are kind of on a huge time limit. They really kind of have deadlines behind them. Often clients want it done as quickly as possible, so there's less disruption to their sites. And often you're renting lifts and pieces of equipment that you're paying for by the day or by the week or by the month. And so all of these are things to keep in mind as factors to how long the mural is going to take and how you can be the most efficient with your time. Okay, so the next thing, so I think I talked about a little bit of this like as I was going here. So with your prep drawing, careful planning in advance is going to save you all the frustration in the world. you are going to be so sad if you don't do a proper prep drawing, especially make sure that you do your drawing to scale. So that means getting exact dimensions of your wall, height, width, but also if there's any windows or doors, points between weird little things like if there's a steam pipe coming out of it, or any of those, like the more measurements that you can get, the better. And that will help you when you're making your drawing, because you can really just open this is how I do it, is I open a Photoshop file and I plunk in all of those little measurements that I have as points, and then it's all right there. And then that helps me get a sense of size, and it helps me get a sense of scale for when I'm doing my drawing. I can be like, oh, this flower is the same size as the window. Do I want that? Do I like that? Like, how is that kind of going to operate in person scale, like when you're standing in front of it? Your prep drawing is also where you're going to get a sense of your color palette. So for me, I use house paint pretty much exclusively. Sorry, Andrea. So what I do is I draw my drawing on Photoshop, but then it's really easy for me to kind of either eyeball or use the eyedropper tool to pick out the main colors. And then when I have those on my screen, I take my color fan book. You can get them from any paint store that you're going to be using. So my go-to is Deluxe. So I go to my Deluxe paint book, and I pick the closest colors to like what it is in the drawing. Keep in mind that don't rely on the website for your colors, because they're always off. Like the website will never be what you want it to be as far as your color swatches go. Get a book, just invest in it. I think it's like $20 or $30 or something. You'll use it forever until they change the colors on you, which happened to me a couple of years ago. Just get it, because you can pick exactly what the colors are. You know exactly what they're going to look like in person. Make sure you look at them in the daylight if you're painting outside, so you get a sense of what those colors look like in different light conditions. This is where you're going to really plan out that color palette. You can do it analog or digital, your prep drawing. I like to do it digital because it's really easy to resize things, change colors, move stuff around, like kind of really scramble stuff as I'm working. But some artists really like to work analog. My friends Nasarimba in Calgary, you guys might know them. They work totally analog for their prep drawings. They make really long, usually it's like a long wall that muralists get. They make like a scale drawing on a piece of paper, exactly like 1 inch equals 1 foot kind of thing. And then they like working with paper cutouts and collage and stuff, because they can use the exact paints that they're going to be using, coat a piece of paper, cut it out, and look at how those look exactly what the paint is going to do on that page. The other thing to keep in mind with your prep drawing is it's really helpful to have a straight ahead photo of your wall so that you can superimpose your drawing right onto it. This is going to help you really see what that mural looks like in that space. Yeah. So next. So the site. So this is a really, 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 really crucial part about mural painting. So this is kind of getting into the stuff that Andrea was talking about with like, what is the wall made out of? A really good point that she made was, does it face south? If it faces south, it's gonna fade. So when you go to the site or when you have a talk with your clients about the project, you're gonna want your wall dimensions, all of those dimensions that I was mentioning earlier. You're going to want to take some photos. So take photos from a few different vantage points, like straight ahead is a good one, from the side, like if there's kind of like if there are any sort of interesting vantage points, like through a tree or something that you might want to incorporate into a drawing, that's a consideration. I like to take pictures of the site in general, just to see like if there's like any interesting trees or like power lines or something that the lines in my drawing might interact with, just to make sure that my mural is kind of very much tailored and site specific to that wall. I also take pictures and inspect the ground in front of the wall just to make sure that I'm going to be able to use a ladder really easily, or if I need to rent a lift, what kind of lift I'm going to need. If you're working outdoors, more than likely you'll need a big lift if it's anything above like a 1 degree grade on your level on your ground. So that's all really good information to have before you start thinking about what to do with this mural and before you start quoting this project. Another thing to take a picture of is a close-up of the wall surface. And this is really handy if you are not personally in the city that your wall is in. Get your client to take a picture of the close-up of the wall, just so you can see, like, is it stucco? There's a bunch of different kinds of stucco. What kind of stucco is it? They're probably not going to be that descriptive, but if they take a close-up picture, you're going to kind of really get a sense of like what that stucco is going to take to cover. Again, so Andrea talked about this a bit, like wall surface, like is it smooth, is it rough, is it previously painted, is it raw brick, is it going to need work, is it going to need resurfacing? All of these things are stuff that you're going to have to talk with your client about. And yeah, like sometimes you're gonna need to sandblast a wall because it's got whatever issues, or you're gonna need to do some resurfacing, or the brick is gonna need regrouting. One thing to mention is like sometimes clients are totally cool with murals just kind of going up and then deteriorating with the building. And I kind of get into those projects, to be honest with you. I think it's kind of interesting to make a mural and then as like kind of a conceptual piece, have it sort of fade into its environment a bit. So on a non-conservator standpoint, like sometimes like I can really get into like a fading of a mural, or like a mural that's like not going to last forever. But just make sure the client is aware of all of this stuff and the ramifications down the road of like what they're going to have to do with the wall. So the site in general, is it busy? Is it like super high traffic? Is there, you know, lots of different businesses around? Is it pretty chill? Is there lots of space for you to work? What's going on with the site? These are all sort of things that you're going to want to know when you paint, because you're going to want probably some room in the front. Like if you're working on a really narrow sidewalk and people are kind of going past you, it's probably going to be really difficult to use like any kind of a ladder or even like work. So these are all things that you should consider when you're looking at these walls and starting to consider like how to kind of fix those issues if they're there. Also, is there bathroom access? Sounds dumb, really important to remember. Is there water access? Is there somewhere you can store your paints like overnight? Or is it going to be something that you're going to have to take in and out to the site every day? These are the kinds of things that you're going to want to take a look at when you are doing a site visit or when you are talking to the client about their project at the beginning. Okay, so we're going to talk about indoor versus outdoor a little bit. I started painting murals indoors. I think I just sort of lucked out that way. It was a really good way for me to get a handle on how the paint handles and how my style works with that material specifically. It's a really good way to get your feet wet before you start working outside. Outside is a whole different ballgame. So inside, obviously, there's no weather, the temperature can be fairly even, so you're not going to have those like huge, wildly fluctuating handling of the house paint. The house paint is going to handle totally different when it's hot versus when it's not so hot. It dries so fast when it's super hot outside, and it's hard to do certain things. It's hard to get a really crisp edge sometimes. It's very hard to blend when it's hot. So when you're first starting out, it might be worth it to kind of seek out indoor murals specifically, just to kind of get acquainted and really comfortable with your medium before you start working on bigger and also more outdoor murals. Yeah, obviously I've got more points there versus indoors versus outdoors. no season limitations for indoors. So it's also a really good way to supplement your outdoor season, which is something I do a lot. You can work 24 hours if you want to, if you're crazy. So these are all really good points. Like, don't knock an indoor mural. I love indoor murals, they're great. Outdoor murals, they're totally different. You've got weather, you've got heat, you've got working in the public, which is something that I think kind of can get to people, because it is definitely a weird way to work. If you're used to working in your studio alone with your earbuds in, just kind of like, I don't know, making weird troll faces, it's like totally different. People are always watching you. They're always going to be like coming up and wanting to chat with you. People are going to want to just bug you just generally. It's really nice to have chats with people and like interact with the public, and like I love that stuff, but it's also sometimes really hard to work because people are always up in your space. So these are some things that you should consider when you're choosing a site or like thinking about indoor versus outdoor, just generally. Yeah, stuff to know. Really flying here. Okay, so here I've got like a kind of overarching bunch of materials that I use that you should kind of know about when you're painting murals. Andrea definitely touched on a lot of this, especially I didn't know about this Nova paint. I'm gonna look into that, and different paints like that. Like I said before, I pretty much only use house paint. For me, it's super convenient because my color palettes are usually very wide ranging. I usually am using like 60 colors at a time. And so it's very convenient for me to be able to pick them in the fan book and have like a gallon of it, instead of being like, okay, so now I have to mix a gallon of this like kooky green. So if you're like, it's just something to consider with artist paint, like the golden mural paints that they have come up with recently. I actually bought some samples of those. I haven't tested them yet, but they're just hard to deal with because they're just can paints, like yellow, red, like they're not like kooky green. So anyway, it's just something to think about. It's very convenient to have a color fan book, and they can mix whatever color in like enormous quantities for you, so that you're not mixing a bunch of paint. So that's something. Okay, primer. Andrea touched on this a bunch. My go-to primer is Deluxe Gripper. It's like a very good general overall primer. It's kind of meant, it's a gripper. It's meant to grip on sort of slightly shiny surfaces, not very shiny. Don't ever paint directly on a shiny surface, definitely sand it. So that's generally what I use. There are definitely different primers for different surfaces. Always talk to your paint rep. Go to the paint store, talk to them about what you need for your specific project. Precast concrete, I know, is a really weird one sometimes because it, I guess, stuff with moisture. Andrea probably has more to say about that. And metal, again, like, is a tricky one because you can't just use any primer on it. So for sure, use a primer if it's like a strange surface. That said, primer is not always 100% necessary. Some of the higher end acrylic latex paints are self-priming. What you get, you pay for what you get, kind of in that sense. The thinner ones, the like lower end house paints, definitely you can't do that with. But some of the higher end acrylic house paints can be self-priming, so you don't necessarily need to use a separate primer. I pretty much 80 to 90% of the time will use a primer because it always is like, it just hides stains, it blocks like markings or other kind of weirdness in the wall. It just seals up like raw concrete or brick or whatever, and it'll make it so that they're less thirsty for like the paint. Primer is always going to be cheaper than your paint, so if you use a primer to like seal up something like a raw brick, it's just going to make your paint go a lot further. So usually I prime first. That said, sometimes I want to keep certain elements of the wall. Or I guess a couple summers ago now, I did a mural on a raw brick wall. Like it was this kind of heritage building, not like official heritage building, but like a very old building with this great, like super old, beautiful brick. And so I wanted to keep some of that brick in the wall or in the mural. And so I, instead of just going for the full prime, I had to kind of like keep those like not primed, those shapes. So I didn't prime that wall, but I used like a very high grade acrylic for the rest of the mural so that it was like a self-priming situation. Tint your primer. This is my #1 tip for primer. Tint it like some kind of pastel-y, gray kind of color. If you're using something like yellows or reds or other colors that are a little bit less opaque, like they take many coats to kind of get it like a vivid color, you're going to want to tint your primer in that kind of vein. I have, I can't remember what it's called. I think it's like Queen Coral is the name of the tint that I use for primer to paint under yellows and oranges. It's this kind of like gross, like old lady, like leggings color, like a beigey, peachy kind of thing. But it works really well to like make it so I'm not going over yellows 3 times. It's a time saver in that way. The other thing about tinting your primer is that it lets you use white chalk on your wall when you're sketching stuff out at the beginning. This doesn't sound like a huge deal, but it really is. White chalk is my #1 sketching tool. I don't use anything else. Don't use sidewalk chalk because it'll mess up your thing. But it's great because you can use the sidewalk chalk on a tinted primer, but not so much on a white primer. And lastly about primer, like I like priming a wall because it kind of gives me a chance to get acquainted with the wall, which sounds kind of cheesy, but when you go up to a big wall, I've painted so many murals, but I still get a little intimidated every time I kind of start a project or like it's day 1 of a really big wall. So priming it kind of eases me into the day, eases me into the project, and lets me kind of like get to know all the little nooks and crannies of that wall and like really kind of go up and down it and get a feel and a sense of the scale of it and like how that's gonna go. So it's kind of a, I don't know, it's a bit of a weird like thing that I do, but I like priming is kind of the start of a project that I look forward to because it kind of marks the beginning, I guess. So that's priming. Oh no, I'm sorry, this is going a little long already. Okay, paint, AKA architectural coatings. I use high quality acrylic latex house paint, like I was mentioning. So the kind of main brands, I guess, are Dulux, Sherwin-Williams, and Benjamin Moore. I don't have as much experience with Benjamin Moore, so I won't go into it too much. There's one called Aura that people really love, and apparently it's quite high covering. Maybe look into that. Deluxe is usually my go-to. They have a few different lines that I typically will use. Diamond is kind of their top of the line. It has like ceramic beads or something in it that makes it a little bit more scrubbable for interior stuff and more, I don't know, weather resistant for the exterior stuff. It's very thick, just keep in mind. So if you're doing lots of blending and that kind of thing, you might need to add something to it to make it a little bit more amenable to blending or to like looser strokes. But it is a great paint. They recently reformulated it, in fact, and I think it's even better, so that's great. WeatherGuard is like a step down. It's kind of their mid-range exterior. That's one that I use pretty often, to be honest, like for most clients, just because it's like usually in their budget range. It's a great paint. I've never had any issues with it doing anything weird, like curdling and that kind of thing that paint can do sometimes. It's a good combination between thick and loose that I don't need to thin it too much. It can be a little bit transparent with like yellows and reds and that kind of thing, but generally pretty good. LifeMaster is their mid-range interior. It's good. Yeah, I use it for interior murals. Though, going down to the bottom of that slide there, I don't normally recommend Behr, this stuff that you can get at Home Depot, except for They have their top of the line is called Marquee, and don't get it if you're gonna get gallons and stuff like that, because it's kind of pricey, and it's like just basically the same as like a deluxe or a Sherwin-Williams mid-range. But if you're doing like a small, let's say like 100 to 200 square foot mural, they have little tester sizes, like 8-ounce tester sizes that are amazing. Like they're a perfect little size for an interior mural. And the paint is actually really good inside. Like it handles awesome. And their color range is great. So that's my interior mural paint tip, if you want to know, if you're doing a small interior mural. And then Sherwin-Williams, I think, is kind of like the classic, like awesome house paint brand. I think I might be switching over to mostly Sherwin-Williams this year for many of my murals, just because I've been using some more and more of them in the past. And I think for me, it's starting to outperform the Dulux generally. And I think that they're a little bit more knowledgeable when I go and talk to them. So I get a better feeling from them. It's like kind of a weird, it's not the most scientific way to choose a paint brand, but they have a lot of really good, well-rated paints that I actually really like. So I've listed them here. There's Emerald, that's their top of the line. It comes in interior or exterior. Duration is 1 step down, interior, exterior. Super Paint, 1 step down from that. And A100 is their kind of like most economical line. I actually really like it, to be honest with you, and it's pretty cheap. I've never had an issue with it. Like, yeah, so that's really interesting to know. It's probably not the most fade resistant or anything like that, but if your client just kind of wants to get a mural up, it's kind of an old, you know, whatever building that maybe it's going to get torn down like in 5-10 years or something, or they're planning on repainting anyway. A100 is a totally legit paint to use for a project like that. Yeah, my computer hates me. Okay, more paint talk. Paint, you can't avoid paint with murals. I talked a little bit about the fan color book. Just get it, don't use a website. One thing to know about the specific paint companies, Dulux, Sherwin-Williams, I'm sure Benjamin Moore, sign up, they all have them. There's like, sign up for their contractors account. There's always discounts like available to contractors, like whether it's volume discounts or just like a general discount on paint and materials. However, like that said, pay attention to the sales that they have, because sometimes the sales actually beat your contractor's discount and they don't give you the better of the two. So sneaky, but keep that in mind. So for estimating, Andrea went through that just a little bit. All of the like paints will say on the can kind of generally what their coverage rate is. In a mural context, err on the side of the lower coverage rate, just because you'll be doing weird stuff like painting over lines, fixing shapes, mixing colors. Like you'll go through more paint with like just kind of the painting process. So err a little bit lower than what they say on the can, in my experience. Yeah, so generally around 300 square foot or 300 square foot per gallon, 100 square foot per quart, a little bit less than 100 square foot per quart, give or take, depending on the line, depending on the brand. Always higher quality equals better coverage, but probably it's a bit of a trade-off, because the higher quality paint is usually thicker, so it'll cover less because it's going on thicker, but it'll be more opaque. So sometimes it evens out depending on the color. Colors, grays, pastels, whites, blues are typically going to be your more opaque colors, and anything kind of with lots of yellow or red or oranges, like kind of funkier browns or that kind of stuff, they're going to be more transparent. So take that into account when you're estimating how much paint you're going to use. If you're doing like a whole mural that's different shades of yellow, you'll probably go through a lot of paint. Yeah, that's just how it is with across brands, across lines, with the higher quality ones being better for coverage generally than the lower quality ones. And also yellows and reds and stuff, fade a lot faster than blues and stuff. So if you're painting a yellow mural, I would go with the best quality paint that you can afford or that your client wants to pay for. Okay, yeah, generally it's better to overestimate the amount of paint that you're using or that you need for a mural. It's a huge pain to have to like run to the store to get like a little quart because you ran out, because you didn't get a gallon, you got a quart of something. Gallons are always going to be more economical than quarts. Just get a gallon if you think that you're going to use just about, maybe a little bit more than a quart, just get a gallon. You can always use leftovers for future projects because as soon as you paint one mural, you're going to want to paint all the murals, I promise. All right, so next we got brushes. So this is another thing that is sometimes really hard for painters who don't normally paint murals to get kind of into, is brushes, artist brushes versus house paint brushes. So they're just house paint brushes. Like I get most of mine from Home Depot. They're purpose-built. You're looking for a synthetic bristle. Something that's a little stiffer is nice if you're painting on a rougher texture, like a high pile stucco or a brick. If you're painting on drywall, you can go with something a little bit more flexible. My go-to brands are Diamond Trilon Pro. I get it at Home Depot. It's got an orange label. The Wooster Pro Shinex, I don't know. It's got a purple yellow label, also at Home Depot. The Wooster brand actually has like a few different lines of like rather soft, flexible bristles. So if you're a real blendy blender, you might want to look at those. Purdy is kind of like my OG brand. It's like the brand that I started painting murals with 1 million years ago. And they're more flexible, but they're a little bit less flexible than the Wooster generally. I really like them for interior and for blending. But usually I go with the 1 inch for those guys. The Wooster, I go with a 1.5 inch. I don't know, you'll find your style. The Diamond Trilon Pro, the orange label ones, those are the workhorse. They're the ones that I use 80% of the time, especially for outdoor murals, because they just really get into the surface and they're a good stiff brush. They'll give you a clean line every time. You won't be messing around with like fixing your craggy line. So that is the best kind of all around brush. It also happens to be the cheapest one out of these, so that's great. Yeah, so for detail brushes, careful about detail brushes when you're painting murals, especially large scale murals, because it's a wormhole. I have found myself quite often heading down the detail brush wormhole where I'm like, oh, I just want to fix this one little edge. I have my little size 4 round brush. I think I could just, but if you're looking at a wall that's like 40 or 50 feet wide, don't sweat the tiny stuff because it will just make your mural drag on forever. So use at your own risk. Sometimes it's a lot faster and more efficient to use a smaller brush if you're doing something like a really tight round thing or whatever. By all means, like it's always good to have them on hand. Just don't go too crazy with the detail brushes because they will kill you. So that said, my go-to brands, Liquitex Freestyle, those are the kind of powerhouse muralists. That's like the best kept secret, I guess, of like detail brushes for muralists. They're the best, they're cheap, they're the cheapest out of all of the ones that I'm going to mention right now. By the way, you're looking for a synthetic semi-stiff brush to push the house paint around. If you use a bristle brush, you might get some interesting textures, but it won't do what you want it to do probably. And you don't want to go with anything too soft with a detail brush because it will just, you'll see, it'll just kind of mush the paint and it won't give you the control that you're going to want. So semi-stiff, definitely synthetic. The other two that I use sometimes are Princeton Aspen and Princeton, oh, I just said Princeton Aspen and Princeton. It's called, don't worry about it. Aspen is better than the one that I forgot to put down. Great. So those are the detail brushes that I would use. Liquitex Freestyle being number one for sure. Okay, why is my computer so sad? Okay, next. Rollers. So rollers you're going to be using a ton, especially on huge walls. Like if you're outside painting a 50-foot wall, you're not going to be wanting to use brushes for the entire thing. You're going to want to get acquainted with rollers. There's a ton of different kinds of rollers, just like there's a ton of different kinds of brushes. Generally, you're going to want a thicker pile, which is like the kind of hairs or fibers on the roller for rougher surfaces. The thicker the pile, the more paint that it throws down. So you can use a real thick pile on a super smooth surface. It will put down more paint, which means less passes, but it might also mean that your smooth surface will have like a physical texture to it afterwards. Maybe that's what you want, maybe it's not what you want. Experiment with rollers. Sometimes they're cool to kind of insert texture and like kind of weird like looks into your mural. The ones that I will normally use are kind of like the ones with like the fabric-y hairs coming out, I guess. Bennett makes really good ones. 10 mil, 13 mil is like really good for stucco. 13 mil probably being a little bit better. Microfiber ones are great for interior. You should try a bunch of different ones and see what you like. Everybody has a bit of a different rolling style. If you have commercial painting experience, you're a much better roller than me. I never really learned properly, so I kind of fumble my way through it. Speed rollers are really good tools. They are the little rollers. I think they're either 5 or 6 inches wide, and they usually come with like a long, I should have got one to show you. They come with a long handle sometimes. So they're really good as like quick drawing tools because they're 6 inches wide, so they're not like massive rollers that you're kind of like drawing with, but you can like really quickly and easily draw something with it, or like fill in a like shape that you don't want to dirty like a huge roller for. I use them constantly. Also with the speed rollers, check out foam rollers. So foam rollers, you can get them at Home Depot in like a pack of 12 in a little plastic container. So one side of it is rounded, but the other side is cut flat. So when you're rolling, the flat side, you can cut like pretty much a perfectly sharp edge with it. So it's really handy for like cutting graphic shapes really fast without having to get a secondary brush to clean up your roller edge. So that's a really handy tool for like large painting. And really going fast here now. Okay, the rest of your stuff. So this is the rest of your kit, basically, or like stuff that you might want to consider in your kit. Spray paint. I'm not a spray painter. I'm real bad at it. I've done some experiments with it to varying degrees of success. It's good for speed if you're good at it. Like you can really quickly fill in areas and blending and shading, that kind of thing. And it definitely adds some like interesting textures with like drips and that kind of stuff if you're into building up like weird textures in a mural. It takes a lot of practice and skill. I will never get good at spray painting. People that are good at spray painting are amazing, and I respect that talent so very much, but I will just never be there. Maybe it's for you, maybe you want to give it a go. Do keep in mind though that spray paint will always fade faster than even bucket paint, like house paint. So artist quality, like acrylic paint, is going to be the least fading, then house paint, then spray paint. Doesn't matter what brand. There's something about the way that it's formulated. When you're spraying the spray paint, it comes out in these particles. Some of them stick, some of them fall to the ground. It just will never fade as nicely or like have the longevity as other kinds of paints. So that can be kind of alleviated a little bit by putting an undercoat of house paint under your spray paint section with a similar color. So if you are doing like painting an apple, let's say, and you've got all this like spray painty, shady reds and blending going on, you're using spray paint. In order for that red apple to like look good for a little longer, underneath it, paint a big red blocky apple with house paint. And it'll help when those pigments in the spray paint kind of fade out a little bit, your apple will still be like it's still red, kind of, and then it'll just fade a little bit more elegantly. Something to think about. So people also use spray paint for underdrawing, like quick sketching. So maybe you want to give it a go for that. Chalk, I talked a little bit about this before. My top choice for drawing and sketching. It's easily removable. Just have like a microfiber cloth on hand with water. Crayola chalkboard chalk is the best. Do not use sidewalk chalk or colored chalk. Sidewalk chalk is like very kind of thick and like gets really goopy under your paint. Colored chalk will mix with any paint you put down. So like if you're using a yellow on top of a white and you're trying to paint like something, it's like gonna mix into that paint color and it just looks terrible. So don't use it. Use chalk and don't like go really hard on the chalk, like just a light line, just to kind of, just so that you see it. Don't put too much chalk on the wall because again, that's adding dust. So that's like kind of negating all of your careful surface preparation that you've done, definitely for your mural. So use chalk gently. Tape, another wormhole. I have definitely been down the tape wormhole where you can get very crisp, very clean, very perfect lines with tape. But then you're messing with tape for like hours. Don't do it. Tape can be very helpful for stuff like if you're painting a bunch of little lines and you want them to cut off at a certain point, put a piece of tape there. Paint those lines and pull that off. Those lines will be cut off there. Stuff like that. Like use it very strategically. Don't use it for everything. Really learn, if you're kind of a tape guy and you're like, I want to get a clean edge, your better bet is to learn how to cut a line with a house paintbrush really cleanly. That is going to save you way more time in the long run to really, really get that skill up because you can do it really fast. You can do it without messing with tape. You can do it kind of wherever instead of having to like, hey, buy that material, have that waste, but then also like the time messing with tape. Learn how to cut a clean line. That said, tape is helpful for some things. So if you're working with smooth surfaces, Frog Tape is a brand that I really like. There's, I think, a yellow, a blue label, and a green label or something. The yellow one is like for delicate surfaces, so I use that the most often. Super sticky. It won't pull up the paint. Like you can paint something, wait for it to dry to the touch, and then put the tape on, and it won't pull the paint up, which is crazy for tape. Most tape will like pull the paint right off if you haven't waited like hours. So Frog Tape is super handy for that. It also gives you a actually perfect clean line, not that janky tape line. So it's good for smooth surfaces, drywall, dye bond panels, all of that kind of stuff. If you're working on like brick wall, cinder block, stucco, get your blue tape. Blue tape is a great workhorse. It sticks, it's great. What can I say? Blue tape. Other additives. So this is kind of where it gets into like dicey chemistry, science mode, or something. Floetrol is an additive that you can get at Dulux, I think carries it, maybe some other places. It's basically it's like a leveler for acrylic latex paint. So it will reduce your brush marks, make your paint a little bit more flat and nice. It will reduce the lengthen the drying time, sorry, so it'll keep it a more open, wet surface for a little bit longer. Not like a ton longer, but a little bit longer. And so you can add up to 10% volume of Floetrol before it starts messing with the paint layer, and your paint will not be happy, and Andrea will not be happy either. So that's one thing that you can add. I like to add it when I'm doing lots of like crazy blends and yeah, basically just blending. And also if it's super hot outside, it helps to like make the paint not dry immediately after putting it on the wall. So that's nice. You can also, because house paint, acrylic latex house paint is acrylic based, you can also add some acrylic artist mediums. So retarder will extend your drying time more than Floetrol, which is really nice when it gets hot or if you're doing lots of like really complicated blending. maybe some other artist mediums are interesting to you, do a little bit of testing. General rule of thumb, 10% by volume is like the absolute max. Don't go past that. Less is better. I also add a little tiny bit of water typically to a really, really thick paint, especially if it's like an older can that's been kind of like evaporated out a bit. It just helps to loosen the paint. But again, don't add too much water because it will mess up your paint. So those are some other things. Oh, good things to have, obviously, on site: a long level, a tape measure, pencil, a knife, basic kit stuff. Invest in a good ladder. I have a, I think, 8-foot A-frame that I use at all sites. Even if I'm using a lift, you're always going to need a ladder for something. So once you kind of start painting murals and you kind of get a sense of your working style, you will build your kit so that you have your kit that you can just go to a site and you know that all of your tools that you need are there. This is stuff that's part of my kit. So there's that. Okay, anti-graffiti coating. Get this question a lot. So you painted your mural and now you're like, anti-graffiti coating. I almost never use this stuff. I hate it, it's gross. It's really hard to work with. It's super finicky. It's super, super cost prohibitive for clients typically. You can kind of get a few different types, but the good stuff is around $250 per gallon, which is outrageous, especially if you're painting a super big mural. So it also changes the sheen of the mural. Some of them are glossier than others. Sometimes there's pros and cons to that. You might want like a super slick glossy look. That's awesome, but just something to keep in mind. It does sometimes make it hard to look at your mural from different angles or different lights, different times of the day with the super gloss. Again, there's a few different types, but avoid the ones that are silicone based, and a lot of there's single component ones and double component ones. Avoid a lot of the single component ones, as all of those kind of dry tacky. So they've got this kind of like a silicone-y, tacky finish to them. And so what that does is it basically just is a dust magnet. So all of the dust, all of the dirt, all of the debris around will just stick to your mural and it'll make it look terrible. So avoid those ones. I think most of the double component ones, which means two parts mixing together to make the coating, I think most of those ones are a harder surface, so they like stuff just falls off of them. It's all good. But something to keep in mind. I think the double component ones are usually more expensive. Yeah, just something to keep in mind. With anti-graffiti coating, if your client wants it, okay, you got to talk to them and be like, it's really expensive. Talk to your paint rep about options. You're going to have to do a little bit of legwork here. I usually totally exclude it in any quotes just because I don't apply this stuff myself. I don't like working with it. I don't think it's strictly necessary on most projects, to be quite honest with you. Most people will avoid tagging a mural, so it's usually not necessary. It's always a bit of a gamble. If you're in a super high tagging area, maybe it's necessary, but for me personally, the cost versus the gain is pretty negligible, especially when you are talking about, again, it comes back to the longevity of your mural. If you're painting a mural with mid or lower range house paints and it's not going to last that long, and you put an anti-graffiti coating on top of it, what happens then is if you want to paint over that mural, you are going to have to sandblast, and that's no fun for the client. So that's something also for the client to know. And these are all just like kind of moving parts that you're just going to have to talk to them about anti-graffiti coating. Also a note about anti-graffiti coating, make sure before, again, Andrea mentioned this, like to know what your wall is made of or like what's going on with your wall. Make sure that there is not anti-graffiti coating on your wall before you paint a mural. Word of advice. So I said I don't work with the staff. I usually, if I were to paint or get the anti-graffiti coating on a mural, I usually subcontract it out. Beware subcontracting that out because most commercial paint companies or anti-graffiti companies or whatever, they will, there's like this kind of typical practice of only coating the wall up to 10 feet from the ground, which is like typical tagging height, I guess. So on like a 20-foot high mural, you've got this 10-foot line of gloss and then whatever other sheet you've got up there, and it looks terrible. It looks absolutely terrible. It makes it cuts your wall right in half. It also makes it age at different rates. The anti-graffiti coating is probably not going to be like an actual UV coating, but it does like offer some extra protection from like weather and stuff like that. Maybe something else to keep in mind for your client. But it will age at different rates at that 10-foot mark. So if you are subcontracting anti-graffiti coating, make sure that you let them know to paint the whole wall. It'll cost more, but if you're going through the whole process of painting a mural, do it right. Fish. All right. Oh, okay. Next slide. Okay, lifts. So this is a fun one. I hope I'm not going too long here. Sorry, I've got a few more slides. I'll go through this really fast. You can use ladders a lot, but when you need a lift, you need a lift. You need training for lifts. So you need specifically for your first certifications, you're going to need in-person training for the first time you do it. You will need 2 certifications. You need fall protection and aerial lift platforms. So like I said, the first certification, it's in class. Each one of those is 1 day with an exam at the end. They're valid for 3 years. And then after that, you can take the various online re-ups. It's like you go through all the slides and you take like a test at the end, but it's online. You don't have to go into the classroom after you've done your in-person cert the first time. You can maybe get away with doing the online certification instead of the in-person training, but you won't get hands-on learning with the lifts, the harnesses, all of that stuff. You won't benefit from actually getting all of that in-person training with those pieces of equipment. And also, OHS can totally bust you, and it sucks. So OHS can come to your site at any time, check on your certifications, check on like whether your site is up to code, all of the stuff that you will be learning in said certification classes. So it's super, super important if you're working at height to be getting these certifications. I know a lot of muralists will avoid getting them or like kind of not bother, especially in like mural fest context, because it's just sort of a free-for-all, but it's not very responsible, and you can risk OHS coming and totally shutting your site down until you get those certifications, which takes however long it takes. So it's best to err on the side of caution and responsibility and just get your tickets if you are needing lifts. I will say, in my personal experience, I have been visited by OHS twice. Luckily, I'm the only muralist that I have ever known who's been visited by OHS, so take that with a grain of salt. I think it has a lot to do with my theory. It's a little bit of inherent sexism in, does she know what she's doing with that lift? Can she drive that? All of that stuff. So if you're a woman driving a lift, you kind of have to like optically look even more careful. Harnesses, hard hat, really like, even if you don't, there are certain applications where you don't need to be wearing a harness, wear it anyway, or some jerk is gonna call you in, OHS is gonna make your day sad. So I won't go too much into specifics about lifts because you will learn all of that when you get your certification, but I will mention, get your certification. Okay, so we're ready to paint finally at 7:30. Sorry, everybody. Okay. Next slide, please. My slides are not going. Oh, my computer might be too sad. Okay, so getting your drawing on the wall. So the more drawing prep, the better. We went through the scale drawing, very crucial. Getting like a photo of the site and superimposing your drawing on it, super, super helpful. I like to have a grid on my drawing that is 1 foot, whatever the grid is, but the grid is going to equal 1 foot in person. So, oops. I'm real sad with the key right now. So that grid is going to be 1 foot on the wall. So anywhere on the wall, if I'm looking at my drawing, here's like an object, I know what 1 foot like away is going to be. Do you know what I mean? Like typical grid stuff. It's super, super helpful, even if you're not using the kind of typical grid method to get on the wall. Use chalk, tape, paint for sketching. We went through all of this. Different methods of getting stuff on the wall. So people often use projectors. I never do. I am terrified that the technology is not going to work or something. I just don't do it. It can be super handy for stuff like specific portraits or that kind of thing. That you need something really specific and like not distorted in any way. It can be really quick. If you get your projection on the wall, you basically just trace it real quick and you're done. The cons are obviously all of the tech issues that come with projectors and technology in general. Will it work? Power sources, all of that. Access to vantage point to put your projector to get the right angle to get where you need to be. That can be an issue that people don't think about sometimes. You're limited to drawing at night during the dark hours. So sometimes in the summer that can be like 11 p.m., which is kind of a bummer to start at 11 p.m. And I find that often projector murals are sometimes not completely tailored to the wall because they kind of are just like, here it is, and then they trace it. And then there's not as much room for kind of improvising around things like windows or like an interesting crack in the wall and stuff like that. I don't know, to each their own, but those are the kind of pros and cons with projectors. Traditional grid, just like how it sounds, probably more ideal for smaller walls, just because it's very time consuming to make a grid on a larger wall to measure it out. But works really well to kind of expand a drawing in a super traditional, time-honored traditional way. A squiggle and doodle grid, I won't go into too much detail about this either because I don't personally use it, but I'm very curious about it. Essentially, you go to the wall and you spray paint a bunch of like totally random doodles. Some people spray paint words, whatever. You just coat the wall in a bunch of like random stuff. You take a picture of that wall and then you take your image and you superimpose it onto the squiggles. And then it kind of serves like a grid in that you're using the same sort of method of looking at where those squiggles are on your drawing in relation to whatever your image is, like where the squiggle is and like how far whatever your object is here. And then the big squiggle on the actual wall, it would be to scale, where it would be in relation to the other squiggles on you. Anyway, YouTube. Great tutorials on that. It's super interesting. It's really good for like when you don't have a projector and you have a super big wall. It's a super good technique. This is my method, winging it basically. So I use kind of a combination of a bunch of different stuff. Sometimes for certain sections, I'll grid out. I always have my gridded drawing, so it's super easy for me to have like a map of where everything is at a glance. I can tell what 1 foot is here and I can measure 1 foot on my wall super easily. The other thing to do, and like you should be doing this regardless of whatever method you're doing, is using the wall to your advantage. So look for features such as windows, cracks in the wall, like sort of weird pipes, like any kind of strange features. And like we said before, like in your site visit, you're taking those into account and taking measurements of those, putting them into your drawing. And like, so that kind of turns into some anchor points that you can measure from for your drawing to see like how far away certain things are from those points. Cinder blocks and bricks. I can't remember, there was an acronym that Andrea said, this is cinder blocks. Anyway, that was really interesting. I didn't know. So cinder blocks and bricks, built-in grids. So that's actually, those are some of the best walls to paint, is a cinder block wall, because they're exactly the same size. They're always 8 inches by 16 inches. So you can pretty much build that grid into your drawing, and then you come to the wall and that's gridded out for you already. Beautiful. So this method of kind of like winging it and using the wall, it takes some practice to kind of get a sense of, but it encourages flexibility to tailor the mural to the wall and your specific site, so that it really looks like it fits, which is nice. Next, okay, finally painting your wall. Okay, work big to small. I'm gonna really rush through the rest of this stuff so we can have some questions. Sorry, everybody. Work big to small, background elements first. I think we kind of covered a lot of these things. Keeping in mind your weather, really keep an eye on the rain. Your paint cans will tell you what the minimum working temperatures are, and that includes like overnight curing times for the film. So if it's less than, say, 5 degrees Celsius, maybe don't paint. And also rain allowances. A lot of cans will say 30 minutes rain allowance or whatever. So you can paint, and if it's dry within 30 minutes of rain, the paint film will be okay. So these kinds of things keep in mind when you're painting a wall. I'm gonna really rush through this slide. One thing I will say, if you're working in public within reach while you're wrapping up for the day, keep in mind those dry times. So if it's like getting cooler in the evening and you're painting on the ground level and then you're taking all of your stuff and you're leaving the site, all of that stuff might not be dry while you're gone. So people might lean on your wall or touch it, mess it up in some way. So keep in mind, maybe work higher up, like later on in the day when you're starting to wrap up. Okay, client work. Okay, so, oh man, I'm gonna have to really like squeeze through these slides here, unfortunately. Oh, my computer's bummed out. Come on.
No rush, Jill. Take your time.
Oh, I'm sorry, everybody. It's probably
No, you're all good.
boring here. Okay, yay, you've been asked about a potential mural project. Good job. Here are your next steps. So we went through a bit about this on the site visit aspect. So ask the client to provide photos of the wall, all of those photos that we talked about before, including surrounding sites, close-ups of the surface, the ground, if we can get it, that kind of thing, different vantage points, just so you can get a sense of the wall. Also super important if you are not in town and or can't have a site visit for whatever reason, or they just want to quote really quickly before they can do a site visit with you. Photos, that's your best friend. Get them to get proper dimensions of the wall, including any windows and that kind of thing if they can. That's going to really help you for the drawing down the line, but also it will really help you for the quote to estimate paint, and also to kind of determine if you need a lift or what kind of ladder and that kind of thing. You're really going to need dimensions, obviously. Have maybe a bit of a conversation about just generally what they're looking for in a mural project, what's spurred them to talk to you about a mural, if they have any kind of ideas or requirements or kind of specifications for something like that. Always good to have in mind before you do a quote. The timeline is super important, if they do it right away or if it's down the road, something good to know. Sometimes it's helpful to ask about budget beforehand, but sometimes it's better to just quote outright, quote first before having that conversation. It's hard to know what is best in what situation, but typically for most commercial murals, I'll just quote my rate and then we can have a conversation from there. If it's more of like a nonprofit or somebody like something like that, I'll see what they have allocated for a mural. It might be lower than my rate, but if it's like a nonprofit I'm like in support of or whatever, or like a mural that I just really want to paint because it's like a cool wall or something, I could be convinced to do a lower rate. It just kind of depends. So take that with a grain of salt. Okay, so when the client comes back to you with all of that lovely information, you are going to prepare a quote. So with the quote, you're going to obviously include your budget, and we'll get into that a little bit. But also what I like to include with the quote is just some general information about what to expect from a mural project for the client. they likely have no idea what goes into a mural at all. So it's really good for them to just sort of get a sense of what you'll be doing, what hours you'll be keeping on the site. If you need, this is a good time to talk to them about anything you need from them, such as access to bathrooms, site access from certain hours, if you need storage for your ladders and your paint and all of that kind of thing. All of these things, you're gonna have to let them know about all of that beforehand so that they can kind of make arrangements or think about that as part of the overall project, so that there's no surprises on anybody's end. So again, it's really important when you start a mural project to really think through all of the steps in doing so, so that you can kind of troubleshoot as you go and knock all of those problems off before they come up, because invariably with murals, there will be something that is weird or wrong or something that you did not foresee. Every single wall, every single site, every single client is different. I never really know exactly 100% what I'm getting into when I start a project. I am always constantly learning and figuring out and adapting. And so with that all said, it's super important to get all of the stuff, the known quantities, like set and out of the way so that you don't have to really be dealing with all of the things at once. All right, so with your quote. So this is how I structure things. Nobody showed me how to do this. It might be wrong, I don't know. Every muralist probably has a different way of quoting and budgeting and all of that stuff. I definitely learned from trial and error, many, many, many errors. And like, budgeting sucks and pricing sucks. But right now I feel the most confident in how I structure my quotes and my pricing and my payment fees and stuff like that. So with your quote, this is what I do these days is I include a design fee for the mural drawing. So before I do any drawing whatsoever, somebody emails me about a quote, I give them a quote and I say, glad you want me to paint you a mural, here's your quote. Before you get a drawing, this is my design fee. And then from there, I will produce a drawing for you. So it takes me 12 to 20 plus hours to make a drawing, depending on the size of the mural, depending on the detail, depending on how much research I put into the content, all of this stuff. It takes a really, really long time to make a mural drawing, like a nice detailed mural drawing that the client is going to get a good sense of what the end product is going to look like, but also that's going to be useful to me when I go paint the mural. So in order for me to be compensated for all of that time that I spend, it's super important that you charge a design fee up front for that. So I ask for it up front, and then after they give me the design fee, it's a 2-week turnaround to do a mural drawing. The fee will discourage kind of wishy-washy clients and people that are just sort of like testing the waters and like, you know, like have like several fingers in several pies and like talking to several different artists like casually about painting a wall and just want to see like several drawings. And so you are putting all of this work into something and then it just doesn't materialize and you spent a bunch of time on something for free. So it kind of discourages that. It weeds those people out or it makes them kind of think twice and like be more serious about it and more invested in the project in general. If they've got skin in the game, then it's more likely that the project, they want to see it through. And it's also more likely that you are gonna put your all into it because you're getting paid for your work. So I always charge a design fee up front now. I usually include 1 round of changes. I typically will only produce 1 drawing instead of a few drawings. I find that if you present a client with a few drawings, there's more changes usually with a few drawings than 1 drawing. So I find it more efficient to kind of do that on my end. they're super unhappy. Obviously, like I'm flexible, like I want everybody to come to a consensus. So yeah, so that's how I approached mural drawings. It's the first deposit and the payment structure that I use for murals for clients these days. So that is that. And then, excuse me. Okay, so these are the rest of the deposits. So this is the rest of the money that you're going to be getting for the mural. Make this known upfront to the client. Often I include the payment schedule in my quote, along with all of the information about everything else that has to do with the mural project in general. Murals are a ton of work, They will take you hours and hours and hours and hours, often several weeks to complete. Planning for them requires purchasing large amounts of non-refundable materials like tinted paint and all of that kind of thing. You're setting aside large blocks of time that you can't do anything else in your schedule. If you're a professional muralist, setting aside a 3-block chunk of time in your summer and then having that canceled means you are out that week because you can't reschedule like a last-minute mural kind of on the fly like that. So you're out that income. So with all of these things in mind, for like the independent artist, it's really tough when people will just kind of pull the rug out from under you. So deposits will help you kind of alleviate that pressure and also not get totally screwed over, to be honest with you. Make sure that you are upfront and honest and have a conversation with your client about what your fee schedule is. You don't have to use mine, but something is better than nothing as far as like when you want to get paid, at what times and that kind of thing, whether they're non-refundable or refundable, that kind of thing is all stuff that you should think about before entering into a project with a client. So for example, my fee structure currently is, the first one is the design fee we talked about, $500 upfront. Then I'll make a drawing, and then upon acceptance of that drawing, then it's the first deposit. So that's going to be between 30 and 50% depending on the project. It secures a spot in my schedule. So that means that I'm penning in a chunk of time for them, and that's kind of like securing that for them. Later, like depending on how far in advance that is from that date, I'll be buying materials and that kind of thing. So often what I'll do is say, you know, it's however percentage refundable up into 10 days before the start date, and then 10 days before the start date, that like whatever 40% deposit is non-refundable because I'll probably have purchased materials, you know, all of these kind of like things I won't be able to schedule in a different, like at that point it's non-refundable. So start to think about like what you need to feel secure in a project like this, because you will be spending kind of like a lot of money upfront on materials and stuff. And especially if you have a few projects on the go over the summer, it can get a little dicey with like stretching yourself a little too thin. So just payment schedules are super helpful. So, and then your final deposit is just due upon completion is like the most basic and easiest way to do it for me. Maybe you want to split it up into 3 deposits. I don't know, whatever works for you. It'll kind of depend on your style, but this has been working really well for me. So I just wanted to share that with you so that you keep it in mind. Okay, so I think that's it. Oh, it's not it, sorry. One more, pricing. Pricing is another really crazy question that I get all the time. You can price a mural in lots of different ways. You'll learn what's best for you as you go. Some artists will give a quote based on square foot, just a general quote per square foot. I have no idea how that works because every single project is so different. All the walls, textures, sites, clients, contexts, everything is so variable. So for me, a square foot like across the board does not work. A rougher wall takes more paint than a smooth wall, so that costs more money. Vertically, like a tall wall is going to be different because I might get lift versus a horizontal wall with the exact same dimensions. Or like running up and down ladders is a little bit more time consuming than not. So all of these sort of factors come in play when you're talking about just doing an across the board square foot rate. So I don't usually use it. And like I said before, I have slightly different rates for corporate, commercial, nonprofit, mural festivals, small businesses, like all of these, like I have slightly different rates based on, maybe that's a weird move. I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing for the most part, but it seems to work pretty well for me. It means that I can really pick and choose the murals that I want to do and be properly compensated for the ones that I think are kind of profiting more on their like cool factor or whatever. Like if it's a corporate gig or something like that, you should be compensated more, I think, as an artist. So all of these factors, you will kind of get a sense for all of that while you are learning how to paint a mural, what your style is, that kind of thing. Yeah. So the way that I price, this is kind of an overarching budget. This is what to factor into your budget. First, design fee. Second, primer, like whatever the coverage rate of the primer that you're using, multiply it by your square foot area of the wall. Paint, same thing. Your miscellaneous supplies, I always include like a couple $100 or something for like extra brushes, rollers, whatever, depending on the size of the wall. Some of the stuff you'll keep for future stuff, that's great. But don't not include it because you'll be using it afterwards, because you will go through brushes, like have to toss brushes eventually. This is all stuff that goes into a project. So yeah. Equipment is the next thing. This includes lift rentals. This includes if you need a spray gun rental, ladder, scaffold rentals, all that kind of thing. Any equipment rentals, budget for that, times the amount of time that you'll be using them for. Usually lifts are daily, weekly, and monthly rates. So if you'll need them for more than 2 weeks, just get a month. The next thing to keep in mind is an assistant. If you need one, sometimes I use one. I charge, like, I pay them an hourly rate, so I put that just directly into the budget if I think that I'll need some help for a super big project or something like that. And then the last one, the artist fee / labor. This is the hardest one to quote because it's how much do you want to make personally for painting this mural? All of the stuff I said before is true, different rates for different projects. Generally, because I know how long it takes me to do certain things while painting murals, I use all of that past experience and I estimate how long it's going to take me to do the project that I'm quoting for. And then I'll just give myself an hourly rate and multiply that out, and then that's my artist fee. It works better for some things than others. Sometimes I wildly underestimate how long it's going to take, and then whatever. But it's a good kind of starting point if you know from experience how long things take you. It's a good way to start thinking about quoting. You might find that you have a different way of doing it once you kind of get going and get a work style and a workflow together that works better for you. Awesome. There's no right or wrong way. Okay, that's it. So yeah, go paint a mural. The best way to learn is to jump in. Like I said, all sites, all murals, all walls are all totally different. You'll learn something from every single one. I still learn something every single time I paint a mural, which makes this job super interesting, and it makes it never boring. It also makes it super frustrating sometimes, but overall, it's the best job in the world. So hopefully I've helped you do that a little bit more. Yay.
Thank you so much, Jill. That was fantastic.
A million hours over time.
That's okay. And thank you so much to Andrea as well. And thank you to the Lethbridge Public Art Committee for supporting this event. Thank you all so much for coming and attending. We're going to jump into questions now. So if you haven't done so already, please put your questions in the Q&A box. So that's going to be to the right-hand side of the raise hand emoji, just because the chat is a little bit full of a lot of comments, so questions can get lost in there. All right, so let's start with the first question here from Eric. A lot of these considerations imply an existing relationship and financial understanding with the building owner. Is that something the artist would initiate, or is it the responsibility of the community mural program organizers?
So it depends, honestly. Yeah, it totally depends. If I'm dealing with a client directly, especially if they're the building owner, then I'll have all of those conversations with them directly. If I am in a mural festival, for instance, and somebody else is kind of the liaison for all of that, that's sort of like where they'll sort of deal with that. They'll kind of talk to be honest, like most mural festivals, I don't even know how much financial like input building owners even have. Like, I have no idea for some of the mural festivals. They're all structured totally differently. So I think it really depends. Like, yeah, I think when I'm dealing with the client one-on-one, yeah, it's on us, but otherwise it can be very random.
For sure. Okay, thank you.
And I'd just add from a public art commissioning body's perspective, you have that liaison with the organization that's commissioning you to do that artwork. So they would be handling those questions that you have. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Another one from Eric. I think you partially already answered this, Jill, but how do you anticipate material costs when you're asked to provide an estimate for this kind of project? How can you build a quote for a grant program if you don't know where the mural will be?
Sorry, what was the first part of that?
The first part was, how do you anticipate material costs when you're asked to provide an estimate, which I think you like did go through and answer in your presentation there.
Yeah, and I think in that case, you might be looking at doing something on the secondary substrates that Andrea was mentioning. It might be that you are looking into like a dye bond panel or something like that, so that the only real factor that you have to consider is like the size, I guess. Like whether that, like, think about a more common dimension of a wall. It's usually like a landscape format on the prairies, at least. Most of our buildings with big flat walls are going to be landscape format. So maybe making a drawing or something to that scale and planning for a dye bond or like a panel mural that will be installed later, as opposed to like thinking about what kind of wall you'll be painting directly on might be a good strategy. I don't know. It might be hard if you don't know the site to really estimate.
Another one from Eric. When you quoted use leftovers for future projects, how are you storing all this? Smiley face. Have you shipped paint for a long distance project?
Oh man, yeah, my basement is, well, okay, so my partner and I are renting 2 houses side by side, which is a dream. So my studio is in the second house and he's renting a gallery space out of it. So I've got this like massive, well, okay, it's a small house, let's be real, but I've got a bedroom in the basement that's just lined with paint, like kind of a gallon of paint with this much left in it, a little like kind of thing. But I've recently organized, color coded, so like all the greens and reds, everything's together, so that when I have a project, I can just go downstairs and like quickly look at what I have before purchasing more. I don't know, it's not a perfect system. I do have a lot of paint right now, so I'm kind of starting to really make a concerted effort to incorporate those kind of leftovers. Yeah, as you go, you'll get better at estimating so that you'll have less kind of extra. Yeah, it's usually better to have more than not enough, but it does, yeah, there's a limit to that.
I have another question here from Kylie. Would you ever use more than one type of paint in the same mural? For example, deluxe diamond next to deluxe super paint?
Maybe Andrea should answer this question correctly and then I'll rip it to shreds.
Well, I think Jill's already said in her talk that she mixes her paints, right? So this is all about adhesion. Are those paints compatible? So if you're using acrylics together, should be all right. But if you're using a spray paint and a spray paints, like Jill has mentioned, are totally, they're volatile. There's very little binder, very little adhesion happening in a spray paint. It's just not going to last.
Yeah.
Right. So it's compatibility. Test it out.
Mhm.
You know, I talked about an adhesion test. Check it out.
Yeah.
And then you know, right?
Yeah.
That's what I'd suggest.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah. I mix paints all the time. I end up having, again, like my huge collection of leftovers. My theory is generally I use only kind of like 3, maybe 4 lines of paint from 2 different brands. They're all acrylic latex. They seem like they work really well together. I've done some adhesion tests. Like, I just kind of go for it, especially on projects where clients are not wanting to spend a ton of money on like lots and lots of material costs. I have this sort of like color library that I can draw from for those projects, which is really helpful. But yeah, so I do it. I hope it's okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We have a question from Hallie. Any ergonomic advice to ensure back and neck wellness?
Nurse shoes. I have like my mom, my family, we used to get, we all wore the exact same shoes called Reebok Princess. They were like the dorkiest white, just gleaming white sneakers when I was a kid. My mom wore them, and me and my 2 sisters all wore them, and I hated it when I was a kid. I couldn't wait to like, you know, buy my cool Vans or whatever. But then when I got into murals, I bought a pair, and then I was like, these, like, get nurse shoes or like some kind of orthotic shoes. It will make a world of difference. And you'll probably go through them. Like, I spend 14 hours a day on my feet, and I go through like a pair of shoes a year for sure, at least. But it makes all the difference for sure.
Legs up the wall. It's a yoga pose.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good idea.
There's been several.
Take a break.
Yeah, several like portraits, you know, like whatever shots of just my shoes. People think that they're so funny, but I don't care because they're making my back happy.
For sure. That's good. Thanks. Another question from Hallie. Do you use cutout stencils or projected image / sketch?
So I talked about that a little bit. I don't use projectors for various reasons. I don't use stencils per se, although maybe that is a way that you want to work. I find stencils a little bit cumbersome for super large scale walls. If you're doing something smaller scale, you can kind of cut these stencils and use them, and they're not, you know, too hard to handle. But as soon as you're working really big, unless you're making a stencil that's like super massive, it's just not going to have the impact, and you're going to have to like paint just like a shape on a wall at some point. Unless you're using stencils. This is something that I do sometimes, is use stencils for like texture, like cutting kind of shapes or something out of whatever, cardboard or something, but then rolling it and then using that as like a background texture or something that's like not an object or like kind of a shape in a mural, but something that's like just adding to, yeah, like a texture to it is like something that I use stencils for sometimes. But honestly, just experiment. Like, if they work for you, that's awesome. Like I said at the beginning, like every single artist will have a different way of painting a mural. There's no right or wrong way. It's just, and that's why it's so hard for me to give really specific advice about how to approach it, is because what works for me might not work for you and vice versa. So give it a go.
Great, thank you. In regards to prepping the walls, Often a wall will have some mixed materials to paint over, such as a metal drainage pipe or plastic covers, etc., attached to the main body of the wall. Do you avoid painting these, or do you prep and prime each depending on the material and then paint over them?
For me, it depends. Yeah, it depends. If it's important to my drawing that they are either blocked out or incorporated, or like if I'm doing something like, you know, there's a drain pipe coming out and I have like a tube painted in that is extended by the drain pipe, something like that, like I might go to the trouble of getting a specific primer and like prepping them with the knowledge that it might not last that long, or like whatever, there might be some technical difficulties with that specific piece down the line. But otherwise, I do tend to just kind of avoid those things. Also, like, I don't know, maybe it's 50-50. Usually people, like those elements will kind of disappear in a mural unless they're kind of like right in the honking middle of the face or something like that. If they're kind of on the periphery, or if they're sort of in a spot that isn't a central focal point, and this is again why it's really important to have like a really clear photo of your wall and like take note of all of those little pieces so you can build your drawing avoiding them, so that there isn't these kind of awkward weirdnesses. Mostly if they're kind of like in peripheral zones, people won't notice them. They'll kind of just be wall stuff. It's not the same as a painting, like a canvas. Like if you had a drain pipe coming out of a canvas, you'd be like, that's, what the hell? But
Yeah.
with a wall, like there's stuff all over the place. Like there's a garbage can in front of it. There's a tree behind it. Like there's stuff, right? So it's like the cool thing about painting a mural is like using all of those extra elements to kind of play with. You can ignore them, or you can kind of utilize them to your advantage. So I know it depends. You can kind of do both, I guess.
Great, thank you. We have a question. How did you get involved with BUMP?
I applied. Yeah, basically. So they have like a call for applications every year. I don't remember what month it is. It's like kind of early. It's maybe in February or March or something. Yeah, I applied. The first year that I did it was in 2017. And then I did another year last year with a collaboration with NASA Rimba. But yeah, both times I applied. And they like to take Alberta artists. It's a really great festival. I think it's actually the best festival, period, that I know about. It's so well organized. They pay really proper fees for muralists. There's great supports. It's just awesome. And they bring in people, I mean, obviously this has been a weird year with the COVID. Last year was also really weird. But they bring in international artists that are super interesting. Mural festivals are really cool. Like once you get kind of a handle on some murals and you really love painting murals and you kind of know your work style and like are really confident that you can pull off a mural definitely within a week, that's the key, without a ton of support sometimes. I encourage you to apply because there's not a ton of mural painters kind of around. So it's always fun to kind of shop talk and stuff with people that do similar stuff to you. And mural festivals are just a really fun time. It's like all of these muralists from all over the place kind of descend on one city, paint a bunch of cool stuff, paint a bunch of awesome walls, and then like hang out and like talk about their work, their practices, tips and tricks, just random stuff. You kind of like get to be a part of a community that's sometimes a little hard to access otherwise. So anyway, but BUMP is the best one that I've been to. So I highly encourage, once you have, sorted out your mural practice, apply.
Great. Yeah, that sounds fun.
It's, yeah.
Question for you, Jill. Can you talk about insurance too?
Oh, that was a slide that I couldn't,
Oh no.
It's okay. Yeah, so insurance, it's actually really fast. So you can kind of do it two different ways. You can get insurance specifically for one project. Like if you are doing one mural and you don't know if you're gonna do any more murals or whatever, you can go to an insurance company and just get specifically insurance for that time period for this project that you're doing. It's probably going to be commercial painting is like the umbrella that you're under. So you can totally do that. It's going to be, I don't know, around $200 or something for like a week or two of like general practice insurance. But if you get into a practice of like doing lots of murals, I get like a yearly insurance policy. So my insurance is $500 a year, and it covers like all of the murals that I do. It changes a little bit. The rate's changing a little bit depending on whether you use spray paint. They really don't like spray paint because like lots of stuff goes wrong with spray paint. It goes all over the place. It can take wind and blow on a car or whatever. So your rates go up if you're using a lot of spray paint. It also goes up if you're doing a lot of buildings higher than, I think, 4 stories, which maybe you are. But otherwise, it's like generally very affordable to get like a year's worth of general practice insurance. You might have a funny conversation with an insurance agent about what it is exactly that you're doing, but they'll get it eventually. And yeah, it's like pretty easy and fairly economical, and probably will come in handy one day for me. I'm sure.
Thank you. We have a question here. It says, this might be out of the scope of the presentation. What if you have a mural idea, which is a photograph? Who would you contact to make your mural? Any suggestions?
I don't know. Would you like, is this like you want it to be painted or something?
I would assume so.
I guess, Andrea, like potentially the EAC would have like a database of artists that might know nothing like that. I always thought that there's something like that. Like generally Alberta artists that work. No, anyway, maybe not. I'm not sure. Outside of finding an artist that you like their style and talking to them. I know there are like mural companies in the States that do like a lot of commercial billboard paintings and stuff like that, like liquor bottles and stuff that are very, very, very highly realism, like mural painting, which is really interesting. But I don't know of any thing like that, like commercially in Canada that you can like call up and hire to do something like that. I don't know. I'm stumped. You might have to do some internet research.
Yeah, Kylie's just mentioned what I was thinking here is that maybe you're wanting to do a reproduction of that photograph onto a vinyl surface or something else and have that attached to the wall. So it's a print reproduction, and then that's put on the wall. Yeah.
Thanks. Another question here. Does the artist often handle the wall prep? If it's extensive, will the client hire a contractor?
Again, this depends. Usually, if it's just a matter of priming, I'll usually do it, unless it's if it's like a super tight turnaround and I'm coming in from out of town. Sometimes I'll request that the client does it just because that's like one less day for me to budget in like accommodation and whatever. But typically, if it's just priming, I'll do it. If it's something more extensive like sandblasting, fixing any like weird structural damage, all of that, definitely that's on the client, and definitely just make sure you have like let the client know that these are issues that you as a muralist are not like, you don't do that. Like, you paint murals, you're not like a contractor.
Not a sandblaster.
Yeah, like that sounds horrible to me. So make sure that they're just aware of the issues that you see, and then like they can subcontract that out. Yeah, I guess that's that. Often, I will often get them to pressure wash a wall. Just that's like pretty. Just wash the wall.
Please clean the wall. Please clean the wall.
Please
At
do.
least
Yeah,
clean the wall.
that makes sense.
Well, one time I went to Texas to paint a wall, and I thought they had pressure washed the wall as I requested, but they had not, but I couldn't tell, and disaster ensued, everybody. The paint just comes off. Like,
Yeah.
it was like I had a painting. It was bonkers and extremely stressful. So yeah, get them to pressure wash the heckin' wall, please.
Thank you. I have a question that's like 3 parts, so I think I'll just ask one at a time here. So Chloe said, I have just painted my first mural / public art. What do I do now? So the first part of the question is, what's the best way to spread the word?
Yeah, I guess social media. See, this is the kind of thing that I'm not so good at. I have been super lucky. I think I was right place, right time at the beginning of my career. I kind of got my in with a lot of tech startups, like in Vancouver and Edmonton and Toronto. And that company, like those companies sort of like spread the word really kind of far and wide within their communities. So I started doing all of these murals within that sort of context, which was really weird and lucky, and like it's impossible to replicate that kind of a circumstance. And then from there, it's all just been like word of mouth. I mean, I do have social media, but I think I post like 10 times a year, like really not very often. So I know that there are better ways to get the word out. And if you are good at social media, even a little bit better than me, which is probably likely, that's the best way. My first mural that I got was literally just me. I mean, back when people were still on Facebook, going on Facebook and saying, does anybody want a mural? And then just so happened to have a friend at a tech company in Vancouver that said, yeah, we want a mural. Like that can be as easy as it is. I will say that right now it sucks because murals are a little saturated. I think there's a lot more interest from people wanting murals, but there's also a lot more people wanting to do murals. So I think it seems like it's a little harder to kind of stand out in that way sometimes. So I'm sorry, I don't have like the best advice for that kind of thing. There might be some kind of like Instagram, like social media tutorial, like online stuff that you can look into that might be a good idea. But generally, I think your work will speak for itself. If you are producing quality murals that are interesting and like people will take notice and will want them, I think, generally. Yeah, and also apply for stuff, like apply for mural festivals, apply for grants to like do mural projects, like just on your own. If you have like somebody who owns a store, ask them if they want a mural, apply for a grant for it. Like there are ways to kind of like do it without waiting for people to come to you, I guess. And eventually I think it will turn into a thing, maybe. I don't know. It's a bit slippery, murals, to be honest with you. Sometimes you don't get any, and then you're sad and you think, do I suck? Will I ever be hired again? And then there's a deluge. I don't know. It's so up and down.
Thanks. The second part of the question, what do you do once you have completed the project? I don't know.
Usually, if it's a big wall, I will buy myself a nice bottle of fizzy wine and drink it that evening.
Treat yourself. What's the best way to get more and keep this type of work coming? So I think you've kind of like said that already with the whole like looking for opportunities and utilizing social media if you can, and like, yeah, spreading word of mouth. So we'll go on to the next one there. Navigating paint quality choices and finishing choices. Sealers other than the anti-graffiti stuff. Navigating paint quality choices and finishing choices. Sealers other than the anti-graffiti stuff. Okay, sorry, I didn't get that question for a second.
Andrea, you want to take this one?
There's varnish.
Yeah.
Most paint companies have a varnish that you could look at. Jill kind of covered, what you're gonna get with applying a varnish to part of your work and not the rest of it, that kind of thing. It's really, what does your client want?
Mhm.
Murals are ephemeral. They're not gonna last.
Yeah.
But what is the expectation of your client? How long do they want this work to last? What kind of resources do they have to be putting into keeping the mural in good shape over time? Most, like, I'm the conservator with the Edmonton Arts Council. They have me to do that, and it's a lot of work. Murals do get hit. Our artwork gets hit all the time, right? So, and it, it can be a small hit, it can be a big hit, it can be, there's no crystal ball that says this is going to be fine and this is going to be hit all the time. But if a mural is hit and there's no protection on it, you're not separating that graffiti paint from your mural.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a bummer. I don't know.
And those are just the risks of having outdoor art, and either having somebody who can, so you've protected it, or you haven't protected it, or you have people that can deal with that kind of situation.
Mhm. Yeah, and it might be worth, if they're really adamant about not getting an anti-graffiti coating for whatever reason, it might be worth having a conversation with them about what your rates are to fix an issue. Like if it does get tagged or something, like what that looks like as far as like you coming back to the mural, assessing the damage and like giving them a quote to be like fixing it, or like changing the mural, like where it got tagged or something like that. So it's like more of a kind of like addition rather than like not a preventative thing, but kind of a like down the line.
The service agreement.
Yeah. So that might be something that you might want to consider offering as an option for clients if they are kind of hesitant to pay for the anti-graffiti coating, or hesitant to get the anti-graffiti coating for all of the reasons why you might not want anti-graffiti coating, including the sandblasting down the road when the mural does inevitably fade. So I don't know. Yeah, there are pros and cons to all of these coatings and paints and all of that stuff. But I think Andrew raised a good point. They are ephemeral. The murals that are being painted now, they're all ephemeral. Yeah, all of the murals that you're seeing on Instagram right now are not going to look like that in 5-10 years. And that's just, yeah, it's an interesting time right now with Instagram and murals, I think. And I can talk a long time about that and how it's changing murals and all of that. But yeah, just the duration and the longevity of murals, I think, is something that people don't think about a lot when they start a mural project.
Okay, we just have 4 more questions here. The next question is, how did you get started? But I think you did kind of like go over that.
Yeah.
So did you want to add anything else to it? It's up to you.
I don't know. It's kind of a weird long story. Like basically, I didn't know what I was doing at that Facebook gathered mural at the tech company in Vancouver. I kind of went and they told me the wall was 400, 500 square feet or something. I didn't really know what that meant at the time. I didn't really get proper dimensions. I made this kind of drawing that was just so detailed, because that was the way that I was drawing at the time. And I went and looked at the wall and was very worried. I proceeded to way over purchase paint because I thought it was a massive wall. And then they rented me a hotel, or like whatever, booked me into a hotel, or it wasn't a hotel, it was like a hostel for like a week to paint this mural. And I never saw the inside of that hostel. I painted this mural 22 hours every day for 7 days, like going totally insane, losing my mind, learning how to use house paint for the first time. And in the end, it worked out. The mural is not like my favorite mural I've ever painted, but the clients were super happy with it, which is the goal. But what happened was I was like, this is what I want to do forever. So it was just kind of like a fluke, to be honest. And I would like not recommend that. Taking on a client project in a different city without ever having painted a mural before. Don't do that, because it might be bad. And you might go crazy and have to sleep on an office couch.
Thank you. We have a question from Aaron. He said, once I used acrylic paint on my garage window, honestly just messing around, but over the next year, the paint severely cracked and lifted and deteriorated. I believe they were tube artist acrylic. Was it just the moisture from the window, or does one ever have to worry about using the tube artist acrylics with the wall mural?
Ooh, Andrea, I really want you to answer this one.
This just has to do with compatibility, right? So a tube acrylic is not suited to go on a smooth glass wall window. They aren't suited to go together. So over time, that acrylic is just going to crack and peel off of that surface. But acrylic paint on a wall that's been primed properly or not, it's going to adhere better, right? It's all about that compatibility. And a tube acrylic isn't suited to go on a glass window. So it's heat. They don't go together. There's lots of factors there about why that acrylic paint cracked and peeled off of your glass. Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up question to Andrea about that? If you were to sand the window first, do you think it would be better?
I think it would. Yeah. That's your glass. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. This question says, if you're new to murals, how do you get your name out there and getting gigs? Which I believe you did answer already. If you want to say anything else to it, though.
I don't know. I think I've said as much as I can about it.
Yeah.
Just like ask lots of friends and family if they want a mural. Take pictures of it, post it. I don't know. It's hard to get a foothold, but just paint as much as you can murals. Mm-hmm. You might want to consider painting, like just to practice painting large scale, or like thinking about drawing large scale, getting some rolls of craft paper and drawing really big on craft paper and putting those up somewhere, or like just to get like thinking about working big and like working with your hands and like or your arms and your whole body to paint or to draw. That might be a way to kind of like practice in the meantime while you're looking for walls. That's how I started, to be honest. Before I got that Vancouver mural, I was painting on giant rolls of craft paper in my small apartment on the floor. So yeah, be creative. Don't give up.
Yeah, and keep your eye open for public art calls, right? Mm-hmm. Municipalities, mural opportunities do come up.
Yeah, thank you. A follow-up question to the other one there. He also asked, did you have, or do you recommend getting training for using lifts or scaffolding? I believe you spoke to lifts already. Did you speak to scaffolding? I don't recall.
So scaffolding, technically anybody working above 10 feet, but you're technically working at height, at that height. So you technically have to be getting fall protection training, technically. if you're using scaffolding and it's just one level, you're less likely to get busted by OHS, and so maybe you can risk it. But yeah, technically you should be getting fall protection training if you're looking anything over 10 feet. It's also really interesting. And if you are at all interested in working with murals or anything like that, even if you don't want to use lifts or you don't need lifts right away, the fall protection training is quite interesting. And it gives you a lot of good guidelines for like site safety in general. It'll help you navigate what kind of considerations that you should have on a work site in case OHS does decide to pop by for whatever reason. It's not a bad course to get. It's, you know, whatever, it'll cost you some money. It's a bit of a, I don't remember how much it is anymore for the in-person training. But if you're gonna be working in murals, eventually you're gonna be working at height. 10 feet is not that high, really. So it might not be a bad thing to look into.
It is your safety, right?
Yeah.
It's good to understand what the risks are, because you might think it's common sense, but sometimes it isn't. And there are regulations that are good to know. And if you're going to work on other projects that have are on a construction site or whatever, it's a really good way to get orientated to that whole world of site safety.
Yeah, yeah, I recommend it to all muralists I know. So many of them don't get it, they don't bother, which I think is so irresponsible and crazy. And like I said, I'm the only muralist I've ever met in my life who's been busted by OHS twice. So it might never happen to you, but I still think the courses have enough valuable information that it's more than worth it to do it, even just for your peace of mind, for nothing else.
Yeah.
Because then if OHS does come, you can be like, hey, here's my ticket, jerk.
We do have a comment.
That
Oh, sorry. They just asked, what's the training called? Was it self-protection training?
So the first one is called fall protection, and the
protection.
second one is called aerial lift platforms. And like typically when you do in-person training, this is the other thing, is the in-person training is gonna probably be at some like weird, slightly on the outskirts of town, like construction-y, weird place. You're probably gonna be the only weirdo artist there, or like the only person not in like the oil sector or construction sector. So it's gonna be kind of weird. So what I often suggest, like if you have a few friends, I don't know, like every company will have different limits, but if you have some friends or people that are all interested in the same training, you can, some companies will let you book private sessions, like private group training for these things. So so you can do it with people that are not like oil bros or whatever. And it's just like a little bit more accessible. And you can also, because typically for the aerial lift platforms, they won't even give you any scissor lift training. You'll get like 5 minutes of boom lift training, which is interesting. And you might like use a boom lift for a mural one day, which is like handy to know. But 90% of the time you'll be using a scissor lift, especially in Canada. And you don't get any in-person training on those machines. Typically,
It does really depend on where you're going though.
Yeah, okay.
Because I've done 2 sessions where I've actually gotten the scissor lift and driven it around the warehouse. It was super fun.
Oh, interesting. Cool.
Yeah. So, and these training courses tend to, you go into a room and they've got desks and chairs and everybody ignores each other, and you just listen to this guy go on, and then you have to put a harness on and go up on a scissor lift, and it's like working a video game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love a scissor lift. I love a scissor lift. They're so fun to drive. Especially the ones with the big ones with the outriggers. You just feel so solid. Anyway, yeah. Fall protection and aerial lift platforms.
Thank you.
Yeah.
one more question. Should we have the client sign an agreement beforehand?
I would, yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it's probably good. I'm not the best for that sometimes. Like I can be a little bit like loosey-goosey with the signing of the contracts, but if I'm going to give you official advice, yes, do that. Always good. And it's the same thing as all of those, like the payment schedule stuff that I talked about. That would be in a contract to be like, you're going to pay me on such and such date, this amount, as per your signature.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always good to have.
Great. Thank you so much. I think that's all the questions that we have. Everyone has been saying thank you so much. Everything's been so, like, there's so much insight, and yeah, so many answers so many questions were answered. Yeah, besides that.
I just wanted to note, so this PowerPoint that I did, I get questions about murals all the time. So doing this was actually very good for me, to just sort of like have everything in one place. So I'm considering adding some points and then putting it as like a link on my website that you can download or something. So just so everybody knows, like in case you like didn't get all my 1,000 words that I shouted at you, I like sometime in the next while I'll probably put it up.
Yeah, and if you want to send me some stuff too, because I'll be uploading this to YouTube, and then
yeah.
we can always add stuff in the comments as well, like just like additional information. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, there's information to be had.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for everyone for attending. It was a wonderful turnout. I hope you all have a lovely evening. Enjoy the warm weather.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Good night.
Good night.